Hello and welcome. My name is Heather Henry, if you don't know me, I think you possibly do. And I'm a social entrepreneur from Greater Manchester. I'm a Queen's nurse. I'm a trustee in the third sector for Being There, which supports people with life-limiting illness. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Salford. And today's event, really, only our second event, is to listen to Sarah, our keynote speaker, who's going to talk about the experience of those living in poverty through the work of Salford Poverty Truth Commission, and start to share a common understanding of what we mean by health creation, and then consider how we would like this network to support us in our health creation journey in terms of looking at what health creation means, how we educate the people who will work alongside communities to support their well-being. So I'm also joined tonight by Katie Finney, who has so kindly offered to facilitate our discussion. And Katie is one of the directors of Amity CIC, who's also here in Greater Manchester. So do mute yourself and just put up your hand when we're going into the discussion part if you want to speak. And the agenda will be that I'll do a brief introduction and then Sarah will talk about the experiences of people living in Salford, somewhere I've worked quite a lot. And then you'll have the opportunity to ask Sarah some questions. So do think of those and then raise your hand when we get to the discussion. And then we'll have a chat about how this network might support the idea of health creation in the curriculum. We're using as our working definition Hazel's definition. She's here with us tonight, a former health visitor and the director of C2 Connecting Communities, which does what it says at the tin, and who's had a long relationship with the University of Exeter Medical School. So there's always been that link for Hazel between academia and the practical work of enabling communities to transform themselves. And Hazel says health creation is the enhancement in health and well-being that occurs when individuals and communities achieve a sense of purpose, hope, mastery, and control over their own lives and immediate environment. And Hazel's not the only one. There's lots of people who have been working in the background on health creation for many years. People like Health Creation Alliance, CIC. I can see Brian's here, as current chair. I used to work within the Alliance for a couple of years. Professor Donna Hall, former Chief Executive of Wigan Council, who's now the chair of New Local. Sir Harry Burns, former Chief Medical Officer for Scotland. And academics like Professor Anthony Morgan, who has been studying health creation for many years at Glasgow Caledonian University. And I think what we found with the pandemic is that this emphasis on purpose, hope, mastery and control has come very much to the fore. And we welcomed Nigel's book, Nigel Christ's book, former Chief Executive of the NHS. He published Health is Made at Home, Hospitals Are for Repairs last year, and there are a series of webinars that accompanied that to start talking about health creation. And the proper name, as we know, is salutogenesis. So as the predominant paradigm is pathogenesis, you know, the management and prevention of illness, patho meaning illness and genesis meaning origin. Here we're looking at the complementary approach, the idea of salus meaning health and genesis meaning origins. And so I think the two work as a continuum, and this is what we want to talk about. Health creation is a big paradigm shift for us, and it can make many people feel uncomfortable. And so we've all been touched by humans, touched as humans through the pandemic. and recognise that as well as needing services, people need to come together as a community and feel in control, have meaningful social contact, and have confidence in ourselves, in our communities, in our jobs and relationships. We need that hope and mastery that Hazel identifies. So today's event, therefore, is about listening to the experience of people living in poverty, and then consider what sort of space we want to create with this network to support and inspire each other, and helped us to prepare and educate the next generation of people who will work alongside these communities. And we would see this network as open to everyone, and that we'd like to co-design it. So not just for academics, and certainly not just for health and care. Nigel's book contained a range of examples from business to environment to education, as well as things like health and care. So everybody is welcome to contribute to this discussion. If you've got any thoughts on that, then do stick them in the chat. And we'll talk about them later. But now it is my pleasure to introduce Sarah Whitehead. Is the co-director and founder of Community Pride, CIC, which specialises in community engagement for those who are deemed vulnerable, marginalised and disengaged. And her role is as innovator of social change and inclusion at Community Pride, CIC. And Sarah, what a fantastic title, by the way. I want to be that. And Sarah was one of the lead commissioners of Salford Poverty Truth Commission, which operated a few years ago. I think they're going to also redevelop Salford Poverty Truth Commission. I can't wait. And the commission was the winner of the Innovation Award at Heart of Salford Awards 2017. So I'm going to hand over to Sarah now. She's going to talk for about 15-20 minutes, and then we'll have the opportunity to ask some questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Heather. Hi everyone. Really good to be joining you at this Health Creation Network. I'm really good to be joining you actually in the early stages, so we can see, you know, how this is really going to shape out, and maybe even be a part of that in the future, as well as just being part of this conversation. So as Heather said, I'm the director at Community Pride, CIC in Salford, and I do have the lovely title of being the Global Innovator of Social Change and Inclusion, which is quite grand, but I'll explain some of that as we're talking. So I'll tell you a little bit about Community Pride. It's an organisation that's actually been operating in Salford now for over 25 years. It was operated for the first 15 years by a lady called Sister Anne, and her team, alongside Church Action on Poverty. And the idea behind it is the methodology and the thinkings of a Brazilian educationalist called Paulo Freire. So Paulo Freire worked in Brazil, I think it was in the 1960s. He did a lot of his work with the residents in the favelas there, who were really low-skilled, disadvantaged. And his work and teachings are around the fact that everybody has something to teach and something to learn, and so no one in the room is the teacher. We're all learning and teaching at the same time in our engagement with each other and in our communications. And his work was really powerful, actually, and he went on to write books like The Pedagogy of the Oppressed and The Pedagogy of Hope, which look at issues around social justice and social equality, but also at issues of education. And Paulo Freire really believed in the methodology of popular education versus banking education. So the typical methodology that we use in our education systems even today, is the banking system, with the idea that a student is an empty vessel that is to be filled with knowledge that is decided by the teacher. And Paulo Freire's thinking was very much more fluid, that we're, you know, teachers and students learn from each other, and no one person decides what another person needs to learn. So this is the theory behind all of our community work that we do. So we run programs called Schools of Participation, and also, as Heather said, the Poverty Truth Commission. And both of these projects have really similar values that start with the issues that are being faced by the communities, and they start with working with those communities to understand what are the issues that they're facing and what ways would they like to tackle them. So rather than coming from a decision-making point of view, or a professional space where they say, well, this is the issue in the local area and this is what we think, you know, needs to be done to fix it, and now let's go and engage the community in our wonderful idea. We come very from the opposite end. We start with the community, we ask them what the issues are, we ask them how they'd like to tackle the issues, and then we work with the council and with the professionals and the agencies to make them ideas happen and create those changes. So we've had quite a few really successful projects in Salford. There's through the years, through the Schools of Participation, where groups have been brought together to look at their issues. Some really strong alliances have been formed and have continued. So we've got the Salford Disability Forum, the Salford Forum for Refugee and Asylum Seekers. We've had a group, the Positive Changes Group, which were a group that represented ex-offenders in the community. And through the Poverty Truth Commission, we've had some really strong outcomes working with the council, where changes have been made, particularly around council tax debt collection and things like that, engagement with communities who are in crisis in particular. So I guess we've been doing a lot of work in Salford, and as Heather says, we're going to be doing another round of the Salford Poverty Truth Commission really soon, to keep that you know, change going, where the local authority are recognising the power of the knowledge and the ideas of local people, and really engaging them from start to finish in their systems change and decision making processes, which I think is really powerful. So yeah, that's a little bit, I guess, well, a lot about community pride and who we are and what we've been doing in Salford. And I guess the reason why a lot of what we do is quite powerful is that I myself back in 2008 went through a community program, a community training program with Community Pride as a local resident single mum. I'd never really, although I'd had the opportunities at school, I was actually qualified for a scholarship to go to a grammar school when I was younger, and I did also go to quite a good college, but I never ended up staying in those systems. I didn't really feel like I fitted in or that I belonged there. And I ended up going down the routes of MVQ and sometimes, you know, cash in hand working. And I'd kind of thought, well, this is, you know, this is how it is. You know, I didn't think anything was going to change until a community worker and Sister Anne came and knocked on the door and had a chat with me and said, you know, we're in the local area and we're looking for people who would really like to get involved and create some change. Would you be interested? And at the time, as I say, I was a single mum. I wasn't working, and I thought, why not? I've got nothing, nothing to lose. And I got involved, and then from there, from being listened to and from somebody asking my ideas and helping me to see the change that I can create with the people in my community, I've done things I could never ever imagine doing. One of them being a company director of a CIC. It was just never something that I thought was achievable. And also, I am an alumni member of the German Marshall Fund for the United States Transatlantic Inclusive Leaders Network, which is a mind-blowing network of leaders from across the world, people who are really trying to push forward social inclusion, equality, and to create this systems change where people with lived experience and minority groups are involved in the conversations, are at the table, and are part of the decision making and respected within that for their knowledge and the role that they play, whether that's a professional one or not. So that's been amazing, and through that network I've been able to travel a lot around Europe and to actually realise that a lot of the issues that we face in the UK are not just our issues. They're issues that people are facing all over the world. And so when we can have these opportunities to create networks and to share and to come together, particularly across difference with people that we might not meet in our everyday life. So like an academic network like this, coming together with people like me and local people is amazing, and it's really powerful, and I think it's what's really needed, to push forward change. So I don't know if I've talked enough or too much, or if anybody's got any questions.
I want you to share one of the stories that certainly I heard when I got the feedback from the Poverty Truth Commission. One of those stories would be fabulous to hear. What happened?
Yeah, so for each person within the Poverty Truth Commission, so for each individual commissioner that takes part, the process is we have 15 local people who are experiencing poverty in Salford, and we have 15 of the key business leaders and decision makers from local authority to be coming together over a 2-year period, sharing food, having conversations, and really getting to know each other at a human level. And just that interaction on its own, you see a change in each individual commissioner in their understandings of each other, realizations of things that they hadn't realized, before about what people go through, not just what local people go through, but also what business leaders and professionals go through in their work as well when they are in a system, and trying to fight for that change as well. I guess one particular story from the commission would be around a lady called Debbie Brown, and so she was a director from the council, I think maybe something like head of communities, and she joined the commission, and in our first meetings, the grassroots commissioners had put together a visual map of the negative things, the things that were having a negative impact on their life. And one of the things on there really large was the city council. And some people had wrote that they were terrorists because of the way that they collect the council tax debt. So sending bailiffs who were quite working in very unethical ways, bullying people who were physically not able to pay. And what would happen is through the bailiffs, obviously the bailiffs would put charges on and the debt would just become completely unmanageable. And so it was just keeping people in this cycle of poverty. And upon seeing it on the map, I think Debbie was really shocked, because obviously everybody that works at the council is really proud of the work that they do. They do great things. And I guess she'd never heard this point of view before. And you could see that it kind of hit her and she was a bit like upset by it. But instead of being really defensive and arguing, but the council have done these things and the council have done this and it's not our fault, which I find is the typical response that you get, she just really held her hands up and said, this is not acceptable and what can we do about it? And that was just like a game changer, because we had a head of services at the council who really wanted to know what could be done for change. And she really followed that through. She organised workshop design sessions with the whole council tax team for them to look at the process from start to finish with people who have had problems with council tax and bailiffs, and to point out, well, this was at this point when I got the letter, I just couldn't bear to even open it. I didn't read it. And so then the council explained, well, when you don't read the letter, this was the next stage of the process. And when you don't respond there, then this is the next stage of the process. And as we walked through it, we were able to pinpoint the really critical points where people could have had an intervention could have took place, where this could have been resolved in a really amicable way. And so we were able to create those changes in that system. And one of the things was simply that when you've got a council tax debt and you get an arrears letter and you ring the phone number, it was an automated telephone line. You couldn't actually speak to a person. And so most people getting these letters are in a crisis and they're upset and they're crying and they want advice and they couldn't get it. So straight away they changed that system, and they also started holding like monthly meetings at gateway centres, like coffee mornings they call them, a coffee drop-in. If you've got a worry with your bill, bring it, we'll talk it through, we'll have a coffee, we'll see what we can do before things get out of hand. And so I think that was a real success story, like that one particular issue and how we kind of worked together on that. And it didn't just stop there. I mean, when Debbie Brown was hiring staff, new staff for these gateway coffee mornings and new staff to run the council tax services, she actually asked for the grassroots commissioners to be part of the interview panel. So we helped, to make that happen, which Debbie said herself was really helpful in making sure that they picked the right person who could understand from the point of view of local people, which I think is what is sometimes needed. So that was really brilliant. And when they did win an award from the Ministry of Justice for the amazing work that they'd done with communities tackling poverty, and also through the Poverty Truth Commission with the council, we did write the city's first anti-poverty strategy, which they won an award for at the Ministry of Justice. They actually took a commissioner with them to the awards ceremony in London, which I thought was really nice as well, because they could have just gone by themselves and took that glory, if you like, but they shared the experience with the commissioner who had also done a lot of work in making that happen. So yeah, that was
Well, I'll ask one question, then I'll throw it open to everybody else. What are your messages for those at the moment who are educating? You know, I'm a nurse, you know that. Future nurses, future town planners, future teachers, future social workers. What is your message for how we should prepare those sorts of people? What should they be doing? Should they be out with you? Should you be doing the lecturing alongside some of the lecturers? How should it be?
I think a really good practice, if you like, or learning would be to be out in communities doing some kind of community projects, or maybe supporting at some sheltered housing, homeless shelters, drop-in centres, things like that maybe, but also community pride. One of the things that we do when we're training our facilitators is we ask them, okay, can you think of a group who you work with or who you see as being disadvantaged, and can you propose a way for working with them? So for instance, something that we've done was going into the homeless shelter and just having a coffee with the guys there and asking them, what do you think could be done to change things for you? Just doing some of those conversations maybe, and getting to hear people's experiences, what people are living through, and it's not all we don't bring it all on ourselves. We live in a system that creates poverty. We live in a world where people are oppressed, and even myself, we psychologically take in all of these thoughts that we're not good enough, we don't belong. I can never own a house, I couldn't go to uni because I just don't belong there. That's not me. We take those things in, and I think it's important to see and spend time with people in their own environments and really understand what they're going through, and you start to see the potential and the opportunities for change with those people. And in my case, I just needed somebody to listen, and I think that's what a lot of people need, is somebody to just listen to them, listen to their ideas, and encourage them.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you so much. So questions for Sarah. Although I think they're taking it in.
I'll just say, if people are on the chat, I'm using a tablet, so I can't see the chat without messing around with the screen, so I've not seen any comments.
Okay, well, I'll tell you, Sarah, they think you're fabulous, and you've had some incredible achievements, that your work is transformational and amazing.
Thank you.
And Michelle's raised a hand from the University of Salford.
Hi Sarah, that was absolutely fantastic, and thanks for your time today. I thoroughly enjoyed listening to that. I know there's probably a few people in the room, Pam I'm pointing out specifically, who and Heather herself are working towards getting our student nurses in particular, but a more wider range of students, engaged with the work, more of a sort of to encourage them around understanding what matters to individuals rather than what's the matter with them. So yeah. We've been pressing that for quite a while now. We seem to be making headway, but one of the challenges for nursing in particular is the sheer numbers of us. There's loads of us, and there is a risk that we saturate all this work. There is a risk that happens, and how do we get the community to see nursing students as assets? What sort of things would you maybe advise us lecturers to think about to try and make that so our students are seen as assets? Because there are a lot of us, and there's an infrastructure that needs to be developed, but I just wondered what you thought might be the first steps towards that.
Yeah, Oh, that's a really good question. Thanks, Michelle. I guess I think I understand what you're trying to say in that you know, there's a big network of student nurses and nurses in general, and I think not just locally but across working class communities there is a bit of a mistrust for any type of institution or healthcare, you know, social care professional. So I think I can understand what you're trying to say, and I guess what I would say is sometimes local people find it difficult to work with professionals and nurses and institutions because they feel they're going to be judged, maybe because they feel that they've already been judged before they've even said anything, and that doesn't always, it's not always because of something that the professional has done. It's just a personal feeling that that individual has, that they've internalized, that they themselves can't even find a reason for, you know. It's just a feeling that they have. And so I think if you can find a way to work with communities where you're supporting what they want and you're not going in telling them this is what you need, this is how you're going to get well, you know, or what you're doing now is not good and this is a, you know, a better way of doing it. I think if you can find organisations to work alongside where your students come in and really support what communities want and what those individuals need, I think then that changes the relationship and the feeling that people might have. Does that make sense, Michelle? Yeah. Does it answer the question more to the point?
Makes sense to me, certainly. Pam, you've got a hand up. Go for it.
It makes total sense, Sarah. I think what you've just said is absolutely the key. It's how we can bring community and local services together. And one of the visions that I thought, well, one thing I know, because having done something like this in France, students were less of a threat because they weren't qualified. So that idea of working with the community, the lay people were it was almost take them under their wing and work with them. And that gave the students a different perspective on those lay organisations, the non-professional organisations. But I was also just thinking about some of the things that you were saying about participation and belonging. And I was thinking, you know, how could, because I've just had my second session with my mentoree for the Girls Network, and that idea of mentoring and coaching a young person, why not? So we've got third-year students that could mentor somebody who's doing the university application as a way of leadership and coaching that could help as well. So I think there's so many ideas. It's quite exciting. But I think you're right, it's that partnership. It's not us going in and telling people what they should be doing about their health. That is totally not the way.
Yeah.
Marvellous. Louise, and then we'll have Brian.
Well, can you hear me all right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Sarah. Great presentation. I was just thinking about what you were saying about student nurses. So I'm at the start of a very early journey in quite a new role with a very large institution called the Royal British Legion. But we look after veterans both in the community and in long-term care facilities with various trauma-informed problems, illnesses, all the rest of it. And something that we've had a debate with the students recently is how to get that health-creating mindset. And I think that's, as Michelle and others have said, Pamela as well, it's about that peer coaching and peer support and showing sort of real lived examples of that. So an example of that would be, we've got a 92-year-old lady that teaches students sign language in one of our care homes. So it's about just showing, you know, how old people are perceived in society, but the value that they bring to a health creating curriculum. and that we shouldn't misjudge, really. And we all have our own prejudices, don't we, and our own thoughts of what it's going to be like. But actually, if we look at people like Captain Tom, you know, just walking in his back garden, I mean, you couldn't get any more health creating than that. And that's somebody who's well over the age of 65. So I'm trying to introduce to students the idea of stuff that Heather taught me years ago. Let's look at the assets. Let's start with a glass half full, not half empty.
Yeah,
that's what I want to say.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot of groups that are overlooked, and the skills and the knowledge and their experience are not being used, and they really, you know, it's powerful when they are.
It absolutely is. Brian's chatting now. I'm going to wave at him. Come in, number Brian. Your time is.
Sorry, I've just been distracted by people here. So,
it's small
yes,
children, I bet you.
It is grandchildren and children. Yes. So that was fantastic, Sarah. And I just wanted to comment on what you were saying about people going into communities and telling them what to do. And I think that, and obviously that is not the way to proceed anymore, but that is actually what happens. So public health is dominated by the idea of going into communities and saying you're too fat and you smoke too much, and let's talk about how we can do this better together. And there are only a very few places that are beginning to change and to think that it's worthwhile and more useful to listen to what the issues are for communities and work with them to solve those issues, and give control and confidence to communities to make those changes. And it's very rare, certainly for the statutory sector like health or local authorities, to behave in that health creating kind of way. So one of the big blocks, I think, to what you're describing is, you know, the mindset of professionals and the statutory sector and how it works. So with the experience of people here and I suppose the academic background, I would be very interested to have ideas about how those things could be changed on a, you know, a local, but also maybe a systematic basis, so that the NHS can behave differently, public health and local authorities can behave differently. Are there suggestions amongst the community here about how we might travel on that journey?
Yes, it really is tricky, and I think that's why we need the network to start to puzzle some of these things out. I'm just a little conscious of time in terms of also discussing how we arrange ourselves. But let's take Judy and Pam, and then I think we'll go into more of a wider discussion. Judy.
It was just really, thank you very much for such an interesting presentation, Sarah. It was just really a reflection on my own experience of learning how to work in the community, suddenly coming out and being very nursey and thinking that I knew best, and talking to people in rural Suffolk, which is quite, you know, there's similarities, but there's lots of differences in the different places in which we live and work. But when going back on a follow-up visit and being a bit baffled why people hadn't taken my wonderful advice on board, because it would have made their lives so much easier. And that just reflecting, if you like, I'm sort of 41 and almost 42 years since I first began my original student nurse training. I'm about to go into a legacy nurse post, which is going to be working alongside student nurses and trainee nurse assistants. And think a presentation like yours really helps me think about how we can work on health creation. So it was just really quickly to say that knowing something about that journey I went on and that transformation process about how I approached people, and really began to recognize that I was working with people in their own homes, and therefore I needed to find out what they needed from me as a way of building relationship before I ever actually then opened my mouth and suggested anything. And that later in my career, I trained as a health visitor and then worked in the Sure Start. I was fortunate enough to work in Sure Start when it was sort of in its first phases. And that was the whole premise of that model, was working in partnership with other agencies, but very much in the community, for the community and of the community. So, you know, sort of working on what were the changes they needed to make or wanted to make in order to create a healthier environment, and ended up taking 25 mothers on the Race for Life with me. You know, it didn't matter, you can run, you can walk, but, you know, people that wouldn't have thought of doing anything like that did it because we kind of like learned to do it together. So
yeah, that's fab. And I think when you do things like that together, it has so much more power to create, you know, change, and to come at things with no agenda, and then to see what comes out of it when you've just listened to what the person wants. You could never have imagined some of those changes, or, you know, like you say, somebody would never have maybe done this before, getting up and enjoying it and feeling really proud of themselves, and maybe doing it again, you know, later down the line. It is powerful, but it takes the courage as well to do something like that and not have an agenda and not really know where it's going to go, or if it's going to be a success, and is it worth putting all this time in. And but when you do, you know, it really is worth it.
Yeah, I mean, I've made a career about being the most helpless nurse in Salford, and constantly asking residents how to fix things, how they would fix things, how they would help solve a problem, you know, like father's well-being. You know, I just, you know, it was very strange to them, by the way. They didn't get that at all, that I didn't come in and offer them solutions, and I certainly never talked about their smoking or worse.
And I guess that's something to note, Heather, is that it's not easy. It's not really just a case of going in and saying, okay, it's up to you, you decide, because and never having had that opportunity before, people feel really overwhelmed with it, that I don't know what the problem is or how to fix it, or, you know, they retreat back to their old ways of thinking, of being powerless, and so there's a little bit of work there that you have to do with them in helping them to see actually the power that they hold and the changes that they can create.
I think that's a really profound point, helping them to see themselves as powerful. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And Pam, is this a new hand up? Are you coming back in?
Yes, it was.
Good.
I just love that image of you know, it's handing that power back, but actually helping in that hand back of power. And the way that I see nursing students, is that idea of bridging that gap between professionals who have that sort of vision of you need to stop smoking, and the public who have a completely different agenda. And in order to actually move the profession forward, it's actually trying to bridge that gap in a more dynamic way, because we can teach the next generation, but if we don't do something about the people that are out there, then actually the change doesn't happen. So getting the students out and working with populations in some sort of a primary healthcare zone, for want of a better word, would actually bring those professionals in the field into something that is much more innovative in the way that we deal with people. And I think the young people are generally quite innovative and flexible, especially this new generation, and they are open to new ideas and new ways of doing things, but they get sucked into that you need to stop smoking. And it's how to actually break that dynamic by working with people like Sarah, who is amazing. I will say it again.
Oh, thank you.
Michelle?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that what's interesting at the moment, and I completely agree, we have to sort of part this thing that we have to fix people, that we have to go out there and tell people what's what, because we've been trained and what, we've got a degree in nursing and hey, we're the professionals. And I do worry though, because at the moment we seem to be reaching a point where the professional regulatory bodies are starting to listen. We've got people getting more interested in health creation. We've got a lot more interest in how we send our students very innovative and creative learning experiences out in the community and working with marvelous organisations. My sort of worry is, at Salford we've seen a quadruple in our applications for student nurses this time, and I'm not sure whether or not, because COVID would have done one or two things. It would have put people off going into nursing or the opposite, it's seen heroes that people have seen on telly, tubes, drips, monitors, ICU beds, and I just have this little fear that what we're going to be getting the next couple of years is people who want to come into nursing with the part of the George Clooney A&E thing now, but now it's like, oh, I can fix people, I can make people better. And I think we've got a bit of a challenge coming ahead. That might just be me. I do try and think glass half full, but I'm just amazed at the number of student nurse applications we've had. And I just wonder whether there's a connection there, whether or not we have a little bit of a battle ahead.
Yeah, I had this conversation, I think, with Jitka not so long ago, which was about what the motivation is for people to come into nursing. Where it's a lot about nursing, but I think possibly medicine as well, because we've got several doctors on here as well, and you get your kicks really, because what you're wanting is to help people and make them better, in inverted commas, and get quite seduced by the idea of doctors, drugs and kit. And I personally speaking, I've had to give up a lot of that to be the enabler of change and not the change itself, as you've probably heard me say many times. And I do wonder about what we replace that with, how you actually talk to yourself to say, I've done a good job because nobody needs my help. My happiest, my most successful times are the ones when I have left, and this is really hard. And, and I've posed before within the Queen's Nursing Institute, the idea of whether nurses are addicted to those feelings of care. And that is hard to say, because we do need nurses. I've been that nurse in A&E, in ICU, not A&E. Don't ever put me in A&E. And you feel like that's what the pinnacle is of nursing, and it really isn't. Took me a long time to realise that it was actually to sit in cafes and listen to folk and find out what was going on in their lives. Don't know if anybody else wants to join this from a sort of medical crew, because there is a movement within medicine around this, isn't there, around more than medicine and rethinking medicine. I know Brian's been involved in that.
Yes, there is a movement, but I think it is still pretty small, I must say. I still think being a saviour, being a kind of white knight, is it's quite a motivation for students, well, and medics certainly.
Yeah, so it's still a bit of a minority sport then, Brian, would you say?
Yes. Really, I think it is, and I think it is beginning to change. I think people are getting a much broader concept of what healing and improvement is, and how, and there is much more interest in keeping people well, but it still is a minority sport. Right.
I'm keeping this going because we're getting into the more of the discussion about, well, what is health creation? So. And we're beginning to get some examples of it. Let's take David and then Rosemary and then Louise. David was a pioneering GP in Runcorn and then went on to help us all in primary care.
Thanks. Thank you, Sarah. That was brilliant. We're all trained, all of us, but I'm a bit out of touch. I'm a has-been. So we're trained in a very limited way, aren't we? Doctoring, teaching, whatever. And we're also quite nervous. So some of the arrogance of some of us professionals is because we're a bit scared to go outside that narrow remit. And it strikes me that one of the things that Sarah was saying, that you need to find the odd doctor or teacher or something who is a bit different from that. And so that you can see, you were talking about students and I understand all that. But one of the issues is, I remember going back when I was first started as a GP in Runcorn, I was still quite traditional doctor. It took me ages to grasp that community bit, and a lot of my colleagues never did. And we need help when we're already qualified, is really my point. When people are new into an organisation, etc. And it's that connection. And one of the things that superstars like Sarah can do is to try and get knowledge of who are the likely lads and lasses who might well be helping you to get into some of these medical and nursing and other people, or schooling or wherever. So it's the issue that we're talking about students, but we could do with some teaching when we are already qualified is really one of the issues. And by the time we've spent time learning to let go, and a lot of us don't, we're already freezing over and set in our ways. So an ability for meeting people like the Sarahs early on when you're already qualified and starting a job would be, I think, quite useful. And then that group of people will itself be the spokesman to help influence others. I'll leave it to just to Sarah. So that's, it's all right talking about students, and of course it's important, but really there's a group of people out there who start work in difficult, socially deprived areas who are actually quite scared, even though we don't always show it physically. And that's where we need the help, and bizarrely, we need the sympathy as well to drag us out of that sitting in behind your desk and doling out prescriptions.
How do we do that within the system, David? Particularly around primary care.
Do that. See, so there was a Sarah in a place, and she had heard that there were one or two doctors. I'll stick to doctors because that's GPs. Were likely to think beyond the traditional medical model, and to facilitate those discussions, because they can begin to spread it to their other colleagues. You see, it's that sort of community movement within the professions I'm talking about.
Yes, gotcha.
Otherwise we freeze.
Peer-to-peer and then learning is what you're thinking. I'll tell you what I used to do, probably still do, which is the health professionals that agree to see me because I was a clinician. And then I'd take residents with me and I'd introduce the residents and then shut up. Although we have been blocked from doing that, me and Chris Dabbs, from time to time. I've seen that happen. Anyway, Rosemary, go for it. You just need to take yourself off mute. There's always got to be somebody.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm a GP in Manchester, and I've been a GP for 6 years now. And what I've realized, like what the previous speaker was saying about the fear that doctors have, is that we are raised or we're trained in a situation where we are told that this is what a doctor looks like.
Yes.
People who are minorities like me, I remember in medical school being told, oh, when you're presenting a patient, stand with your hands behind your back and don't talk like that. I'm from Zimbabwe, very, vivacious, lots of sunshine kind of place. And so that put me in a box, and I felt that I am not the kind of person who would be a doctor. So I have to become this vision of a doctor that I need to pretend to be. And I pretended to be that for a long time. And the consultations were really robotic. Everything was fine, but I could feel that there was something missing. And then as I did my own work of understanding that I'm a minority, everybody's a minority in some kind of way, I have my healing to do. So I'm not this doctor on high in a big chair, but another human being who's on a healing journey, as is every other person sitting opposite me in the chair. That's when magic started to happen, this human connection. And I'd always been taught, keep yourself out of it, keep your stories out of it. And suddenly you're talking about inner child healing with patients. And oh yeah, when that happened, when I was 3, I read in front of the class and I've been embarrassed ever since. And every time I'm in a social situation, I feel like, everyone's watching me and something terrible is going to happen. And you start connecting the dots with patients and they can see, oh, actually, this thing that I'm repeating at the moment is something from my childhood, and the lights come on. Or, oh, this thing that I'm doing is something that my father did and my grandfather did and his grandfather before that. Then it takes the judgment and the self-judgment and the onus off the patient. And it's like, oh, it's not me. I'm not a bad person. It's not me that is this awful person who's smoking in front of my kids and you're judging me for that. It's this generational, possibly, trauma that's been passed down, and this is my way of self-medicating it. And as soon as you can make that link together, then it takes the gravitas out of it, because then they suddenly realize, like we suddenly realize, because I have many realizations in these consultations, that it's not about you being a bad person, and don't place that judgment on yourself, but this is about much bigger things that might have even started 50 years ago. So how do we even begin to, on a professional level, in training in universities, help students in the curriculum to understand that these stories might trace back hundreds of years? I'm from Zimbabwe. It was colonized 200 years ago. I'm still carrying colonial wounds that I'm healing to this day. So we all have these within our own stories and our ancestral stories. So how do we incorporate this into healthcare today?
Yeah, that's fabulous. I certainly get your point about what you're talking about is being your authentic self, which is what we're talking about now, certainly within the NHS, around leadership and authentic leadership, distributive leadership at every level, which includes citizen leadership, I think. And the experience of trauma, I think, is massive. I see it, there are trauma programs, and then there's like a huge wasteland where nobody talks about it. And I think, well, it's obvious why people are behaving as they do in my mind, and it's obvious why they're taking drugs and other substances and getting into fights. I know where it comes from, but it took me a long time to realize what I was seeing. And I think it was only when I worked alongside a community that I saw it for real.
But if I am pretending I don't have trauma as a GP, then it's like this power dynamic then settles into the consultation where, with anyone, if I'm pretending I don't have trauma, then I accept the trauma. But whereas if we are together in our trauma and understanding that, stuff that we all have to heal, that's when we are no longer separated, and it's not me judging you or you feeling judged by me, no matter what our backgrounds are.
Yeah,
that's very profound.
Really powerful.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's really profound. Louise.
Thanks, Heather. I just wanted to say a couple of comments and then put a challenge to this Health Creation Alliance.
Do it.
So, picking up on what David said, Michelle said, and Rosemary about fear, professional fear, how we're trained as medics, how we're trained as nurses. We're always talking about that, but we don't collectively tackle the system.
So your challenge is really to have the discussion with the regulator about how their regulations affect this idea of health creation, because it is about people living their lives, and how regulations sometimes stop them from working with us as professionals. Have I got that right?
Yeah.
Wow, I don't know how that would play out in with the DMC, but we do have some links with Andrea Sutcliffe at the Nursing and Midwifery Council, don't we? I think George has a connection to Andrea. She seems like an open-minded woman. I don't know her. But
yeah,
David.
she does. I mean, she talks about the mum test for elderly care. So she talks about, you know, would your mum like this? So she's pretty open. And George, it'd be good to get on to speak to you as well about some of the stuff that he does, because he goes against the grain a lot.
I've spoken to him. Believe you me, I've interviewed him for my book. Yes. Yeah, a man after my own heart. David.
It's because I've been around a long time. I remember when CQC was set up, or its predecessor, was it HIMP or something? I can't remember now. But, you know, the reason we have CQC, of course, we have professional regulators like NMC and things like this, but the reason we had CQC was because of a failure of quality leadership from the service. You know, so that what has happened is, you know, politicians, when they get a problem, want to do something. So they often invent some other body or something to force quality in or pressure in or something. But one of the reasons we had CQC is because our services weren't good enough. Well, that's a failure of us.
Yes.
We could have been more leaders about setting standards and so on and so forth. And so, in a way, having done CQC investigations, and I used to have these little disputes with my fellow visitors, because I was quite conversational, I'll put a nice word, when I was meeting people and wanting them to come out with ideas rather than this driving in. But it's a classic NHS management thing taken to extreme of trying to drive in quality rather than helping to create quality. So there is an issue for us out there in the service to take a much more leadership role about standards ourselves. But other people get more and more damn regulators.
Yeah, I agree, David. And going back to Michelle's point and Heather's point about nursing and the NMC, we are regulated, we do have professional standards, we're responsible and accountable for that as individuals. But again, if we think about the biomedical model, 60% of nurses, and this is up-to-date data, don't even work in the NHS. And I know 3 of us on this call already. So
I'm going to bring in Chris, because he's made a point in the chat. Is he still here? Oh, you're there. Yeah, because he said you were going to go. Come.
Well, I suppose listening to what everybody's said, because there's the cliche that, you know, the NHS is a sickness service, not a health service, and all that type of thing. So I suppose in my head, I sort of think, if you're looking to change the health and social care system, you have to identify what the real drivers of that system are and relate this agenda to those drivers. Otherwise, the system won't listen.
What do you think the drivers are, Chris?
Well, from my experience, I'm coming at it from a lay perspective. So it's the things that get chief executives sacked, fundamentally. It's balance the books, reduce hospital admissions, reduce prescribing. They're the three things that drive the healthcare system, and there's equivalents in the social care system. So I suppose what I find with the stuff my organisation does, whatever it is that we might want to achieve, but we have to present it in those terms to be taken seriously. So, for example, we're currently halfway through a little project, an experiment that's trying to address loneliness. And we're doing that because the frontline social workers and the community nurses repeatedly said this is the #1 problem that we face. So we're not doing it in that sense. We're not being funded because the system wants to address loneliness. We're being funded because they need to get the nurses and the social workers away from trying to deal with loneliness when they're not capable of doing it. So if they can focus their skills on clinically what they're good at, is the way the system would think about it, around that. And what we're slowly doing, because we're talking about working with chip shops and taxi drivers and all the rest of it. That's what local people tell us is actually important. But what we're also having to do is slowly, bit by bit, recognise what drives the system, in reality, what drives professionals because of regulation, money, commissioning, whatever it is, and bit by bit start to change the description. So at the start, we use very, very clinical language. We talk the system language until we've got a degree of credibility, until we've shown that what we're doing isn't just laughing about and actually has some evidence to it, and we'll find ways of presenting that evidence in a way that the system likes. So we'll present bar charts and financial graphs and all that sort of stuff. That's what the system really wants to hear. And then later on tell them how we achieved it. Because otherwise they get scared because it looks weird. So one of the things we found, slightly more with public health at the moment, but we're making progress with healthcare. In terms of the sort of work we do with local people, is what seems to be working is presenting the current jargon about co-production. It's being framed as a form of innovation within the health and social care system. That means you can take risk. It means you can try different things. It means things can fail, but also it's acceptable within the system. So we can do both, but there's a marketing job there, and 90% of marketing is listening to the customer. They've got the cash. You know, they've got 100 billion quid, and my organisation's lucky if we get 5 figures. So I need some of their money. In order to do that, I need to help solve some of their problems, not just go in and tell them they're wrong, because that's not going to work. But if we can help the system solve some of their problems, then they start to get interested, particularly the problems that they don't think are solvable. And then they get interested. And I've done this with individual clinicians as well as the system. But you have to get real about what drives people. It's basic marketing.
Fantastic, Chris. Thank you so much. I haven't stopped this discussion because we were sort of crossing over from Sarah's experience into a wider discussion about which was sort of expanding on the idea of health creation and how it can be seen within an academic context. So I've made a note of all of the points that you've been making. We do have to think, though, as we're getting into the last quarter of an hour, about how we want to be together, which is why I brought Katie along as a bit of additional facilitation support. Because this is our second chat. The first one was, do we need an academic network? To which everybody said, yes, we do. And then this discussion is heading more towards, well, how should we do that? You know, what should it be? What should it do? And having talked to Katie, I think part of the discussion is about experiencing health creation and listening to the experience of our communities, and thinking about that in an academic context, to have the contribution of those who've actually worked at national strategy and policy level or had dealings with it, and several of you in this chat actually have, so that we know how to manage the system, in inverted commas. So I think for the last 15 minutes, I think me and Katie need to have that discussion with you about, so what should we do? How should we be together? You know, what should this network be about?
So I will come in there, Heather. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for inviting me, and it's a real pleasure to hear from Sarah. I'm just down the road in Salford, so her work is very close to my heart. So thanks for the invitation, and I'm delighted to be here to hear from Sarah and from all of you, but also to play some small part in building the foundations for this network. And various people, of course, will have various theories and approaches to how do you start in bringing a group of people together so that when they get in action together to make something happen, it's effective. And so that's kind of my sphere of work, that can be implied in all sorts of different contexts. So I'm glad to bring it here today. And what we would always start with, whether it's with a group of residents in communities, within an organisation, within a strategic group, is forming a group purpose, and sometimes what's referred to as a culture or an agreement of how we might work together. Now, I'm sure that that's not new for many of you here, the idea of doing those two things. Now, those two things, I would suggest, are so vitally important to a group's success in the long term that we probably can't do them justice in the 10 minutes we've got left. Now, a lot, as Heather pointed to, a lot of what you've discussed this evening, I've taken lots of notes, because I think within that conversation there were pointers towards what the purpose of this network might be. And some of the kind of behaviours you might want to see from each other, which is the kind of work we would have been doing this evening. So my suggestion, I've thoroughly enjoyed myself, so I have no problem that we don't go ahead with this bit of my piece of work. My suggestion is that I come back another time for a session that is specifically about the network's development. So if everybody is in favour of that, I would be happy to do that.
Yeah, you're getting the thumbs up. Michelle's saying about starting through shared experiences and stories and practices, and reach out to others to expand the network. I've certainly got interest from Donna Hall, who's the chair of New Local. I've asked her recently, and she's quite interested in talking to us, you know, as well. So that's another opportunity. But I think you know, that discussion, it would be really, and that support would be so valuable to us. Thank you, Katie. Have you got any immediate other thoughts about our next meeting? I'm thinking about 6 weeks time for people, and to reach out to others. I'm busy writing to everybody I can think of that might have a bearing and help us with this at the moment. If you could do that also, that would be great. Michelle, do you want to talk?
Heather, I was just going to say that Exeter University are very interested in being part of this. They're on leave at the moment, on extended leave, but you've got Andrew from St Andrews and you've got Katrina from Exeter, yes, and Robin, and they really do want to support.
I have been spending an awful lot of time talking to a lot of people, old and new, about this. Thank you, Hazel. That is much appreciated from the University of Exeter.
I can't see her, but you're extraordinary, and what you've described tonight was what we've been doing for 25 years, and it works every flipping time. Congratulations, you're awesome.
There we go. Michelle, and then Judy, and then Pam.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's really, I think, to inspire conversation, it's really nice to have people like Sarah come along and talk. And, you know, I think that's what I meant by sharing experiences. I think it really does inspire sharing of ideas and thoughts in a sort of very informal, very relaxed environment. And I think it's really useful to have that maybe format for the next time we meet as well. I don't have anybody in mind. I just think that I just think it really does enable us to see better and listen to these wonderful stories about these inspirational people. So
yeah, it really is. The sort of relational aspect of this is coming across very strongly. Judy.
It was just a quick, because obviously I'm quite geographically a long way away in East Anglia here, and I think it's a connection. You talked about this on the Queen's Nurse network. So obviously there's I'm just seeing that there's a new push about getting student nurses into community placements, and if we can be quite innovative about the types of placements that people get exposed to, so that they are more with a health creation focus as well as a disease management progress, then again, slowly we're getting that out there. But you know, in terms of a wider focus, I'm just bringing in the fact that potentially I'm going to be working with the East of England higher education institutes, and Laura Macmillan, I believe, is the person that I've been in contact with at the moment, Jitsa from the OU, in terms of student nurse and the trainee nurse associate programs. So it's a very different part of the country. A lot of it's very rural, so some of the descriptions of the problems will be different, and some of the practicalities of the problems will be different, because a lot of it's quite rural. However, I think that's another strand to the discussion.
Yes, I think me and Hazel certainly have a lot of experience of working with rurality, don't we? Yes, I've worked in Lincolnshire. Yeah. Yes, which was a very profound experience for me, and coastal regions as well. I think it was Pam next, wasn't it? And David, then Joyce. Are you all right, Pam? Yes. Okay. Well, let's bring Joyce in, because Joyce hasn't spoken tonight. How wonderful you're looking, by the way, I might say. Not seen you for a bit.
It's that filter you can get on Zoom, Heather.
Oh, I have that.
I'm sorry for not introducing myself in the chat. I did feel a bit of a fraud for being on here, but I'm actually Sarah's co-director at Community Pride, and I came on to support her really, and I felt like a bit like a fish out of water ever since. Seeing as though you're all very highly qualified academics and medical people, but where I did feel that I had something that maybe I could add was the lady who was speaking about social care and care homes. My mum just passed away in January, having been a resident of a care home for 4.5 years. And I just feel so strongly about what happens in care homes and what happened particularly during the pandemic with the way that we just weren't allowed to see her. And I just wondered, as Sarah was saying, we're all about the people with the experience having an input into the conversation. And I was just thinking, you know, maybe you may benefit from some people who have I don't know, patients. Or my mum couldn't speak up for herself because she was very, very poorly, and I was her voice. So, you know, sometimes people do need a voice, like the residents of care homes, and, you know, not a professional who works there, but somebody who is at the receiving end of the service.
Absolutely, Joyce. I completely agree with you. And, you know, certainly in our care homes that go from North Yorkshire right down to Kent, different parts of the country, our family relatives, our essential caregivers have been with us all the way, and our volunteers. So we don't do anything without them. But I know that's not the case across the country, is it?
David, I'm going to give you the last word, and then I'm going to do a bit of summing.
Quick. Following up what Katie had said as well, my interest is not the academic side, but at the moment, we've got two potentially new organisations which can be a disruptor to the normal, same old NHS model, and that's primary care networks and maybe the big ISCs. And so what I'd like to know is, how can we as a body, using academic connections, try and impact on those? Because by the time they start getting on with their work, they'll just freeze over to another same old organisation. And quite a few primary care homes which preceded the primary care networks, which I helped to, I think, originate, did some really good on community involvement, on the sort of broader health. And if we don't get in there now, when we've got two potential disruptors, especially primary care networks where they're local, we'll be nicely talking about things, but missing an opportunity. So I know you want to set up an academic network, and by nature, a lot of the academia will be at a bigger level, at a central level, at organizations. So one of the tests to discuss in future for Katie and you maybe is, how do we make that connection when there's some urgency to try and get there and be involved there now?
Yeah, I think that's why I need a discussion with Brian at the Health Creation Alliance, because he'll certainly be thinking about that. I think Brian's gone, hasn't he?
Yes, he has.
He will be, and he wants some further discussion on that, because I've got to be careful not to do the alliances work.
And David, I just wanted to say we're starting some work with Primary Care Network in Surrey, 5 primary care networks around health creation, and that starts this week. I'm pleased to hear you say they're disruptors. I love disruptors. And please,
potentially, yeah, if we don't waste the opportunity.
Great. And please, will somebody tell me about the filter in Zoom, please, Joyce?
We'll have a little chat about it, Hazel. Get it on. All right, well, we are at time, and I want to thank Sarah, thank Katie, and to thank Flourish for helping us as well, yes. And yourselves in terms of this second discussion, because it's been, I think we will spend an awful lot of time thinking about how we want to arrange ourselves. And Hazel taught me that in complex adaptive systems, things will self-organize, and so therefore we can spend some time not deciding, which is what we've done tonight. We've renewed some acquaintances and met some new voices, and how wonderful to catch up with Sarah Whitehead and the work that she's doing. And I so want to be part of your Poverty Truth Commission, but I'm not high up and I'm not a resident, so we'll have to talk about how I fit in, being a Traffordian, goodness me, and not a Salfordian. How fabulous it is. I do think we should meet again in about 6 weeks to continue this discussion. I have got half a promise out of Donna Hall, who, and if you don't know New Local, they've written some fantastic strategy documents about how society have to change. It's mostly centered around you know, how communities function, and is more on the sort of local authority side than it is, which I think we strongly need to bring into that. But to have this discussion, really continue to have it about how we can help each other to help to make people's lives, to enable people to make their own lives better. Yeah. All right. So without further ado, I'll leave you to your evening. Thank you so very much for joining us. David, I've noted your comments, and that I will talk to Brian, and you can talk to Brian as well about some of this, so we don't do Brian's job. But for now, thank you so much. Go safely.
Thank you.